will end, is in the process of declining by gerrymandering and by state election officials who are also candidates for office. For example, the recent successful candidate for governor of Georgia was, I believe, also the chief electoral official of Georgia. Gerrymandering, state and local electoral officials, for example, in Alabama, who closed down department motor vehicle offices in counties of Alabama with African American majorities to make sure that African Americans can't get a driver's license, which will allow them to vote. And when there's a lawsuit insisting that the state of Alabama has to open DMV offices, yeah, it opens them in African American counties one day a month, and it's on a weekday. That's the way that democracy is in the process of ending in the United States, not by military coup.
Also, we just see hyper-partisanship eroding the usual checks and balances at the level of the federal government, and also just the impossibility of getting things done. We have just the legislative process grinds to a halt, the appointments of judges or not becomes so partisan that it's a kind of a winner-take-all phenomenon in politics that seems corrosive. And also there's just, you studiously avoid hooking your book to the news cycle, so you only mention Trump once in the book, in the prologue, and I'll mention him here, but there's this interesting component of your analogy to Chile, which is that, and I was surprised to learn this, that Pinochet struck everyone as a totally reasonable guy, a moderate guy, a guy who was not likely to do anything extreme. The reason why this analogy is striking is that we're not in that situation at all with respect to Trump. I mean, no one would imagine that he's a moderate guy or someone who's incapable of doing something extreme. I mean, he's a visibly disordered personality, and we are just, those of us who are concerned about having promoted someone like this to the highest office in the land, console ourselves with the notion that the institutions are such, the system is such, that no matter how disordered he might become, he will not be obeyed at those critical moments where his disorder could redound to the disadvantage of all humanity. But in the case of Chile, even there, the warning signs were not at all clear with respect to the person of Pinochet.
In the case of Pinochet, two very knowledgeable groups of people misjudged him. One was the CIA, our CIA, whose business it is to try to understand people. And the CIA prepared a report on Pinochet, which concluded that he's a harmless oldish man devoted to his family, with a strong interest in religion and his children and his wife, who would never become a political leader. And then the other people who were deceived were his fellow generals, because Pinochet, it's not that Pinochet led the coup. There was a coup for the leaders of the Chilean armed forces. And the army chief of staff was forced out somewhat before the planned coup. So who's the next army chief of staff? Well, Pinochet is in charge of the army in the Santiago, and he's old. So he was the logical person to be the army leader. The plan at the time of the coup was that the leadership of the junta would rotate among the heads of the different Chilean armed forces. And when it came time for Pinochet to rotate out, he didn't rotate out, but he in fact had developed a secret service that terrified his own fellow generals and admirals. So it's not just the CIA, but also, and it's not just Chilean intellectuals and Chilean left-wingers, it's Chilean centrists and Chilean righters and Chilean military leaders who misjudged Pinochet here in the United States. So Trump, many people recognize negative qualities about Trump. Mitch McConnell, I would be perhaps more concerned about Mitch McConnell than I would about Trump, because Trump is so clearly aberrant. Mitch McConnell is more mainstream, bad mainstream. But again, let us not just bash one side. In my book, not only did I avoid Trump after page 20 or so, where I said this is the last mention of Trump in my book, I minimized talking about Republicans and Democrats, because the two cases before the Supreme Court now about gerrymanders, one is a Democratic gerrymander and the other is a Republican gerrymander. It's not the case that the two